Welcome to Tips for Teaching Online with Blackboard. My name is Tracy Miller, and I'm the Online Teaching Coordinator here in Faculty Development Instructional Design Center. There's a little bit of contact information in front of you if you would like to talk to me offline or shoot me an email or even follow me on Twitter. I'm happy to continue this conversation that we are just starting here today. So my agenda for today is to share with you some of the tips that we've kind of learned through the years to boost your efficiency and productivity when teaching an online course. Some tips that will really help you support your online students. And then a little bit towards the end, we are going to share some tips on improving your synchronous sessions. So we're using Blackboard Collaborate Ultra for our workshop, and that is something that you can use in your online course for synchronous sessions with your students. So I want to make sure I share some tips regarding that too. So let's begin by talking about our efficiency and productivity, especially if you are new or maybe haven't really had an online experience yet. You're probably wondering how this is all going to work and how you're going to be able to be productive in your course. So that's what we'll kind of start with. And this workshop in general, I guess, is very practical. It's very tip-based. I'm going to give you a lot of ideas that you can try out, and maybe even in your face-to-face course if you're using Blackboard extensively. But feel free to ask me about the process in more detail, or I may even recommend some additional resources for you if a tip really jumps out at you. So the first one is to share with you the new course request process. It's newer at this point. It started last summer, and I think we've had a lot of good success with it through the fall and spring course request process. Basically what it is it just got a lot easier to make your courses available for your students. And it starts with that course request process. So it used to be you would request your Blackboard course through faculty service tools, and once you felt that the course was ready to make available to your students, you went through a process to make it available to them. Right now, what the default is when you request your course, it has this auto availability. And you can see it in this box here. And that means the course will automatically become available to the students the first day of the semester. Now, if you're completely comfortable with that, that's great. Just use that default option. You also have the option of setting a particular availability date at this point where it automatically become available. So maybe in an online course, you might want to open up the course, let's say a week early. You know you have everything set up. You want to make it available so the students can kind of get around in there and explore. You can kind of tailor that availability date then. Now, if you're a little bit nervous, you want to make sure the course is ready before you hit that go button, you can still go back to the old process of making the course available the same way you did before. So a lot of new options, choices that can make things easier for you. Mike, you've got a question. Would you like to ask it with your microphone or in the text chat area? Oh, you're just testing. Okay, no problem. It looks like it worked, by the way. So the next tip I have to really boost that productivity is to think about how you're going to structure your course. We always recommend that you structure your course in this module idea. You could call them module, you could call them unit, you could call them weekly, anything where you're just kind of chunking things up into these contained pieces. But what we're suggesting here is that when you do structure your courses, add your content and assessments together into one package. And so in this screenshot I have here, I have module 13. This is actually a screenshot from a previous course that I taught last spring. And all of the content and all of the assessments can be found in this particular module folder. So the students know that everything they're going to need to do at a given time, in a given week perhaps, they can find within this folder. Now you could also create links in the folder. So for instance, the student may be able to find their assessments or their assignments in the left-hand navigation, or even their content over in the left-hand navigation. But they're also going to have links to it within the folder. So they're not searching for things as much because it's all kind of packaged together. I see we have a couple new folks coming in, so welcome. We have started a conversation in the text chat area. You can get to that by clicking on the Collaborate panel at the bottom right-hand part of the screen and then clicking on the speech bubble. If you have any additional questions, go ahead and add them into that text chat area and I can give you some more assistance with that. So my next tip as it relates to course structure is when you're designing and developing an online course, build out that first module, that first week, and then use that as a template to be able to copy and replicate that course structure from module to module or week to week. And it's going to have that consistency that way. And you're going to get the structure kind of really the way you want it before you make a lot of copies and you're kind of making modifications to each module, and maybe it's becoming a little bit more inconsistent because you might have made module 1 on one day and then a couple days later made module 2, and you're going to get kind of that inconsistent pattern. So, you know, this is my tip, to create sort of this template. And maybe this is something that you create and then you keep and you hide it from your students. So you can see I've just given some ideas. You know, you want to have the unit, maybe you're going to put in the dates of the unit. You want each unit to have some sort of welcome for your students. I'm just kind of adding in all these prompts that are going to then be copied and replicated week after week so that the students can really see that consistency. They know what to expect from week to week. But again, you're also not making a lot of individual tweaks because you kind of front-loaded a bunch of folders with each week, and then you're adding things in maybe kind of separately. So Mike, can we create a fake course to play with for structuring courses? Excellent question, and yes. If you think back to the course request process that we were talking about, you can also request a shell. And a shell is that fake course that you can play in. Sometimes it's called a sandbox. The sandbox can, again, be maybe you're playing around with a couple different course structures. Maybe you're building out a couple of these templates and feeling it out. And then once you get it the way you like, you can do a course copy from that shell into the actual course section. Students are never added to a course shell. So sometimes folks will build out their shell and wonder where their students are. The students will be automatically enrolled through MYNIU, and that only happens in that course section. But you can definitely request a shell. It's a great way of building things out and copying it from semester to semester too. Awesome. Great use of the emoticons too. Thumbs up. My next piece of advice when we're talking about course structure is to remember to use your student preview mode. So the student preview mode is actually at the top right-hand side. To me, it looks like an eyeball, maybe some swirls around a dot. This is your access to get that student perspective. And so as you're developing things, it can really help to get that student perspective. What have you already made available? You can even try things like submitting an assignment or taking a test or something like that. So I recommend using that student perspective through the student preview mode. When you exit out, and I think I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, when you exit out, you can keep that data. And that way you can even go back and grade your work and kind of see how that workflow works. So student preview is a great tip. I'm going to answer Jenny's question. Where can I access the recording of this workshop when it's over? I have to leave early to teach. Jenny, that it will not be a problem. I will actually send out the recording in a follow-up email along with the the workshop evaluation. So you'll have access to that recording through the email, and you can catch up on whatever you missed at the end. Mike says, can you view from a specific student preview? If you mean like if you want to see what a specific student sees, no. You're almost going to become your own new student. So if you, for instance, wanted to see what was available to students in a particular group, you would want to enroll your student preview ID into that group so you could see a similar experience. One of the, okay, good. You can also look at user progress. If you use the drop-down menu from a variety of things you do or you post, you'll see this user progress. And to me, it's not intuitive what it means, but it'll actually show you open and closed eyes to what students can and cannot see. So sometimes that's helpful when you provide the student with an accommodation and you're trying to figure out if this folder is now open to them and not the other students. So check out user progress too to get an idea how that works. Okay, so I think I'm caught up on my questions, and I've talked about the student preview mode a little bit. I'm going to switch gears a little bit to talk about some ways you can make your grading more efficient and you can grade a little bit more quickly. The first one, it may seem obvious to some of us and maybe not to others. So you can definitely use discussion boards in your course, and sometimes they're used to just have interaction with your students. Maybe it's a getting to know you activity or frequently asked question activity, but it's not something you're going to grade. If you are using discussion boards as assessments, prompts that you're going to evaluate, readings that your students are going to critique and add into a discussion board, make sure you enable grading on the discussion boards. It's really going to help your grading workflow. And what that does is, first of all, it's going to let you see when students have sort of completed the required number of posts for you to go ahead and grade. And that's going to give you that needs grading symbol that we use for any of the other grading things that we use, whether it's a subjective test or an assignment or something like that. Your discussions will end up in that needs grading workflow. But then it's also going to show you the number of posts that students have done. You can see that in this column here. You can go ahead and click the grade interface right from here and grade, for instance, Louisa's contributions to the discussion board. And you're going to see just Louisa's posts in that grading workflow. So you're not hunting and looking for her different posts because You know, they're kind of all over the place in the discussion forums. You'll be able to see them grouped all together, and it's going to make the grading a lot easier. I will tell you that because they reply to each other and it kind of brings them all together in this one space. Another tip I would just say is let your students know what they should put in the subject line of a discussion post. So whether that's their name, the topic of the discussion, even when they reply to each other, you might recommend that they address each other so you can again see whose post they're replying to and how that conversation kind of happened. Maybe outside of this grading workflow. It really helps to see who they're responding to and what they're responding to. If you don't give them instructions on that, what ends up happening is there's a lot of threads and a lot of posts in there that all start with my reply or you know, I think this about this week's discussion board, and you're not really sure where they're coming from. So the more instructions you can give them on sort of how they should address each other in the discussion boards, the more help. Denise said, is there an easy way to link at this place that would jump to an actual discussion? Yes. So if you mean this place, I'm interpreting that as the place that you want the students to find the discussion board in the course. So I meant in the grading section. If you create a gradable, like we said, enabling the grading discussion, it's going to create a grade center column. And so that in your needs grading or in your full grade center, you will be able to jump right to, like you said, jump right to the student's place in the discussion board. So try it out. There's lots of kind of links. So if you're grading and you use the full grading center and you see that needs grading link, again, that'll jump you right into the discussion board where they made the post. Great. A lot of great questions today. I'm glad I've got a great audience. I love talking about this stuff. So my next tip for grading quickly is to use the interactive rubrics. So in the text chat area, let me know with a yes or no if you've used the Blackboard interactive rubrics. No. Okay, no. Oh, good. So I'm going to share something with you. Okay, we've got a yes. So bear with me. You might still discover something new. So in the left-hand navigation under the course tools is rubrics. You can build out these interactive rubrics and you can see what the results of those look like. You have criteria that you can establish with your students. In this case, we have program descriptions, program needs. This is actually a sample one from an evaluation course. So across the top is sort of the areas of achievement. And you can change any of these to make them more specific to your needs. But the real meat behind this is you can add these descriptions and these behaviors that you're expecting of your students and assigning them various different point values. Now the rubrics take some work up front. You're creating them. You may already have a rubric in perhaps a Word document, and you're going to be reconstructing it in Blackboard Interactive Rubrics. But once it's done, it really makes your grading easier, and you can copy this rubric to multiple assignments, use it course after course, and so that work up front really saves you a lot of time when you're actually going to do your grading. So here's how it pretty much works. So for instance, Denise, you were talking about you know, jumping right to that discussion. You could be in your grade center, You're going to find a student that has completed the discussion posts. You're going to jump right to that discussion board. It's going to allow you to open up your rubric that you created, and you're going to read over the discussion posts, and you're going to simply click on whatever level of achievement you think the students have achieved. You're going to remind yourself of what you were looking for because the descriptions are right here. But there's also this nice window for feedback. So if it's pretty obvious what it is, you may be just quickly clicking on those different levels of achievement. But if you want to provide your students with any feedback directly in the spot that's important for them to understand, you can add the feedback right there, move on to the next student. Makes your grading much easier. Again, you can use this rubrics in discussions, assignments, even essay questions are a really good way of using rubrics. Found dual screen makes it easy too. Yes, because you can pop it open. And sometimes you want to have maybe dual screens where you have this pop-up open on another screen, or maybe you even have the rubric open in a different browser. Just be really careful with two different browsers, because sometimes you'll complete an action in one browser and not realize that it's saved in the other one. But it can really keep you organized where you have the kind of the rubric open in one area and you're looking at the discussion board in another. Thanks for sharing that. Make sure the other browser is still connected. Yes, I've had that happen where things time out. You're you know, kind of really involved in reading over something, and then you get a phone call and time gets away from you, and you go back there and you realize that it hasn't continued with you. It's timed out and you do something and your work isn't saved. So another great tip, thanks for sharing, and that's exactly what I like everyone to do, is kind of ask questions and share their own ideas. I always learn new ideas from everybody every time I do a new workshop. So my next grading quickly strategy is to create smart views for your grade center. Now there are some default smart views that just kind of happen when you request your course. Those are usually assignments, discussions, tests are often the defaults. If there's anything else that you would like to almost filter your grade center down a little bit, create these, yes, and the needs grading is that filter that only shows you assessments that are currently need grading, so you're not kind of overwhelmed by all the other things that aren't quite ready for grading yet. But getting back to this smart views a little bit, you can create that in your full grade center. At the top, you'll see a manage column, an organization column. You're going to look for create smart views, and then it's just going to ask you to name it, and it'll be named after things that either you've lumped into categories or that a specific grade center, like this final project one is probably a specific grade center column. And so you're just going to see things that deal with that final project. The other great way of using smart views that actually happens automatically for you is if you combine courses into a master course. So you have maybe an undergraduate and a graduate level course. It will automatically group your students into groups based off of that criteria, the graduate and the undergraduate students, and you can create smart views for those particular groups. So pausing a little bit for questions. Yes, I'm anticipating them. How, when we check the assignment I graded already, when I use needs grading, the items I graded will disappear from the list, right? So that then I would recommend you going to the full grade center. So let me click back because that's another good tip. My arrow's kind of blocking it, but when you open up the Grade Center, there is a little arrow just like the one above that will go right to the full Grade Center, and you can go back and you'll see the grades in there that you've already assigned to the student, but you can always go back and look at the attempt again and maybe go back and see the feedback that you've given them or anything else like that. My final project that I do in my course actually has an integrative, there's a draft and then there's a revision. So I always like to go back and look at what kind of feedback I've given them on the draft version and make sure they addressed those suggestions that I've given them. So I go back and look at previously graded work quite often. So follow those tips. Jim says, very handy for TAs grading different sections. Yes, if you wanted, assign them a group or something like that. That makes sense. They know to go to that particular smart view, and they're the students that they need to kind of handle, right? Mike says, can you provide how to do that after the presentation step by step? So is that going back and checking the previously graded work? Is there a way to automate group making instead of TA creating groups based off of? Sure. You know what? And I'm going to give this a try. If everyone's open to it, I'm going to see if I can share my screen. And look for, okay, maybe a course. I'm going to open up, let's see, trying to pick one that might have something that would make sense. Let's go into the course that we use. Are you guys still getting the crazy screen? No, as long as I move my screen over. Okay. Yeah, whenever I flip to the screen that has you all on it, you get the crazy screen. But as long as I don't click on that right now, if I went into the Grade Center, I'm going to click on that arrow over to the right. And if I want to go back and look, here's that needs grading symbol, so I know that something needs grading. I'm going to click on the drop-down menu and look at the attempt. I'm going to be able to see that student's attempt here. Now the other workflow is to go back and look at things that have already been graded. And so let's see if I can see something that, this is actually a test. I guess actually that first one was probably the best example because it would you just go in there and look at that attempt. And you could see what your previous grade was in here. If there was a rubric, the rubric can be right here, and you can go back and look at any of the feedback, any of the descriptions that you've used. And again, I can go over that at the end again for folks that are interested in that. Let me get my slides back up there. Go back to where we were. Okay, hopefully I didn't make anybody too dizzy. Michael, I'll get back to your question in just a little bit because I want to keep moving here so I get through my tips. But remind me if I don't, if I forget at the end. Okay, so another grading quickly tip is to use the grade submission tool at the end of the semester when you're transferring your grades to MyNIU. So if you're familiar with how you add your grades to MyNIU, you might not be as familiar with the grade submission tool that's available in Blackboard. So if you've been doing all your grading and all of your assessments in Blackboard, there's a great tool that you can use that will simply sync everything up for your students and send that to MyNIU. A couple things that you need to do to kind of get that set up is to make sure your total column is the one that you want selected. And you can do that using a drop-down menu right at the top of that total column and making sure that is set to your external grade. You're also going to edit that column to make sure that you have letter grade selected as your display. And then use the grades submission tool, and that is found under tools. It's called grade submission tool. It will give you this screen that tells you that, are you sure these are the grades you wanted? This second screenshot is what that sort of looks like. You can go ahead and change those grades at this point. So for instance, if there's a student that might be getting an incomplete, but you've worked out a plan with them to kind of make up their work, you might want to at this point mark them as incomplete. If a student has an F, you will also be asked during that final process of syncing it over to MyNIU what their last date of attendance was. So think about that when you're starting this process. Over here on the screen before is this last access. If you have an online course, that last access is a really good indicator of when the last time your students accessed the course. So go ahead and use that date for that last date of attendance in MyNIU. So let's switch to supporting your students. That's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of get ahead on this, because I really want to give you some tips on how you can use Blackboard to support your students. That is the approved last date of attendance for online courses. Yes, that is actually the date that they last accessed the Blackboard course. And so often what happens is that the students that are getting the Fs have not accessed the course in quite a while, and that's probably the reason that they're not being successful. So it's not necessarily the last date that the semester ends, it's the last date that the students access the course. And in some cases they did poorly and they accessed it up to the end, and that's your own decision on why that might have happened. So supporting your students. Create a getting started area for your online students. I've created this link to my getting started area in the left-hand navigation. Call it Welcome Start Here, so it's very obvious where the students need to go. But what I'm suggesting is that make that getting started area your course entry point. So right now the default to the course entry point is that home page with all the different modules in it. And that can be useful, but it's also can be confusing for that online student that doesn't quite know where to click from there. So to change your course entry point, you just go to Properties, Teaching Style, and there'll be an area that will say change your course entry point, you'll see that it's set to the home page. You just need to set it to that welcome page. So every time the students enter the course for the first couple of weeks, they will see this welcome page. After a couple weeks, you might want to go ahead and change that course entry point, either back to the home page, the module page, or what I like to do is actually change it to the announcements area so they can see any current announcements that I've provided with them. Good way to begin, put your students in the best space possible right from the beginning of the course. So another way you can help your students use the course is to use those due dates. So anywhere that you see a due date in an assessment, all of the assessments really have those due dates. Use those due dates. It will be added to your students' calendar so that they can see those due dates maybe across multiple courses, or they can plan their week out so that they see those due dates. So that's really beneficial. But it's also going to show up in the assignment of when it's due. You can let the students know that their work will be marked late because of the due date. So if they do submit something after the date and time, you will notice that it has been submitted late. It's up to you what your policy is of accepting late work. Perhaps you are not going to accept late work, or maybe you're going to knock off points. But adding those due dates, add it to the student calendar, and it lets you know when students are submitting work late. Another tip is to put your folders in reverse order so that the newest folder is always at the top. Whenever you build anything in Blackboard, sort of the last thing you did ends up at the bottom. So what I'm suggesting is you kind of drag and drop and move them into this reverse order. And then you can use adaptive release or make the courses date and time restricted so that the newest, freshest sort of content and information they need is going to appear at the top of the page. And they're not going to, you and your students are not going to be scrolling down to the bottom more and more as the course unfolds, because again, that newest information is going to be at the top. I'm going to throw out another poll. I think I'll get crazy and I'll actually use the poll. How many of you have already used or are familiar with the Retention Center? Okay, we've got some yeses and many no's. So let me tell you about the Retention Center, because it's a really valuable tool, I think, and often unknown. So the Retention Center is under Evaluation on your left-hand navigation, and it is information that Blackboard is already sort of collecting, and you may not have even known about it. And so what it's looking for is these at-risk behaviors that your students may be demonstrating. So these at-risk behaviors come in the form of missed deadlines, grades, and the default is students that their grades are 25% less than the class average. Activity alert, which it takes in a variety of things that the students might be doing in the course. And then access alert. So again, have the students not really access the course for a while, and that is triggering this at-risk behavior. And you'll see the students in this chart, and these red dots demonstrate some of these at-risk behaviors that they've may be doing. And you can use the Retention Center to reach out directly to those students, and it will create an email with a default message about their at-risk behaviors, but you can change that default message to say something more customized, more meaningful. Perhaps you'd like to schedule an office hour with them. Maybe you're just kind of letting them know that you've noticed this and you'd like to take some steps to correct that. The reason I love to point out the access alert right before the summer is because our summer courses are often reduced down to 8 or 4 weeks long. And so students, online students in a 8 to 4 week course that have not been accessing the course for more than 2 or 3 days, again, depending on how long the course is, that is a real concern. So check out your retention center. And look for these different alerts. You can also customize them. So if you'd like to change any of the default requirements, then that is really easy to do in the Customize field that you can click on at the top right. For building community in your online course, here's some ways that I think you can use Blackboard really strongly. First of all, in your Grade Center, we've talked about the full Grade Center, you can add a column. You can see at the top there's a create column. We might have used this column or this method already for adding grades in that maybe we're doing manually, or maybe even taking attendance or something like that. In this case, we're going to create a column, but we're going to select text as the type of field we'd like it to hold. And we're also going to hide it from our students. And what it is the preferred name field. And so you're going to use that to remind yourself of what the student's preferred name is. So maybe that's their nickname, maybe that's a shortened version of their name. And you might have discovered that by a getting to know you activity, or maybe the way they're signing off on their discussion posts or reflection journal. And so then when you're giving them feedback or replying back to them in some way, they feel a stronger connection to you because you're addressing them in the way that they would prefer to be addressed. I've been calling Mike this whole time, and that's because I'm pretty sure he sent me an email recently, and that's the way he signed off on it. So I recognized that, and I wanted to make sure that I was addressing him by his preferred name. The curse and the wonderful thing about online courses is there's a lot of evidence, right? And so you can always go back and look at these things and hope you're right on them. So my little secret is to add that into my full grade center so I can remind myself and go back and have, again, that stronger connection with my students because of it. Another way to learn more about your students and build a community in your course is to use the Blackboard profiles. So if you are in Blackboard and at the very top of the interface, you'll see your name and a silhouette, and you can click on that and click on the home page, or even your silhouette at the top. You can go ahead and add a picture of yourself. Your students can do this too. They can add their major, they can add all kinds of other information about themselves. The real benefit I like with the Blackboard profiles is that this picture will show up in the discussion board, so you'll be able to see sort of a face with their posts. My students, I let them add any type of picture that they feel represents themselves. So sometimes they'll add a picture of the dog, other times they'll add a picture of a favorite summer scene. That's okay. It's still telling you a little bit about themselves, but it's up to you what you suggest they add to their profiles. Denise says, will the profile you create carry over to all courses present and future? Yes, it will. So you may notice that some of your students already have profiles, and that will be really apparent in the discussion board, because again, you'll be able to see their pictures in it. And this is something in the global navigation area, so that's why it carries across courses. One of the things that I like to see about my students, because I teach a gen ed course, is how far along in their program they are, because that also helps me understand, if, for instance, a senior right now that is getting ready to graduate might have a different mindset than a student that's much earlier in their program. So I can see all that when they've created that portfolio, and again, helps me have that connection and interaction with my students. Another suggestion, when using the discussion boards, this will really help you manage the amount of emails you get from your students. So if you create this sort of question and answer Q&A help forum, whatever you want to call it, really encourage your students to ask their questions in this type of forum. They will often respond to each other, so they might get a quicker reply, but they're also going to maybe ask that question that others also were sort of thinking about, and again, everyone benefits from that answer. See you, Andrew. Definitely watch the recording. He's gone. So question and answer forums are always helpful. Since I'm on this page, I'll also mention that the Cyber Cafe is another way if students want to talk about off-topic conversations or have more social conversations. It keeps those kind of discussions out of your more content-heavy discussions, so it doesn't get in the way of the content-heavy discussions. For the discussion boards, you will see a quick link to this place. I have historically had difficulty with students using this feature. Using the quick link feature, or just the, the discussions, yes. Interesting. Let's talk about that, because I want to figure out what difficulty you might be having, because usually they work pretty well. Okay, well, you know what? I'm a proponent of it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if you like to subscribe to any of the discussion boards, what that will do is that will send you an email letting you know that that there's been a recent posting. So that, again, that might seem contradictory because now you're getting more emails, but it's just your quick indicator that when you get a minute, go in and check that email. It also, check that discussion board. It also is something that your students may want to do, because if they create their own thread, they can subscribe to their thread, and then they will be able to know when somebody's replied to them. So this might be a recommendation for your students. It's just hard to get all the students to join the 365 groups. Yes, it can be. So I would like to record videos for my online class and upload to Blackboard. Does Blackboard support this? Actually, you can record videos the way that I'm recording this workshop today by using Blackboard Collaborate, but there's also a variety of other ways to do that. I would encourage you to come to our next video workshop. There's one on creating captions in your recorded videos, because when you do record videos for your course, they will need to be transcribed and closed caption. So you can do it. You actually can create them using your cell phone. You can create them using other kinds of software like that. And then we actually think uploading them into YouTube is better than actually adding them into Blackboard, because you're going to use up your space in your course really quickly. So again, I encourage you to look for our next workshop on that, because that's an entire workshop on its own. Another tip. You'll avoid using forced completion. That is a setting in your tests, and it seems like a really good idea, but the problem is when you do that, if there's any sort of interruption, internet interruption, Blackboard goes momentarily down, kicks the students out of the test, and they can't get back in, and then they're calling you, and you have to adaptive release the test or the quiz to them. To still get sort of that capability, what we recommend is to turn the auto submit on and set the timer for a time you think is reasonable to complete the assessment. So if they do wander outside of the test environment and you're worried that they're looking up answers, that timer is still clicking down. So it's going to encourage them to stay in the environment, and it's going to auto-submit if they are still sort of searching for an answer. So it really dissuades them from doing that. But if the internet goes down again, they can quickly get back into the test, and it's gonna work better for the whole team, really. Michael said YouTube unlisted works well for that. Okay, and you like my suggestion. Awesome. Yes, and unlisted does, it's not public. Your video for your course is not going to go viral because the students are only going to have access to that because they have that unlisted link from you. Oh, really quickly, going over the synchronous sessions. Keep your slides simple. One of the things when you upload them into Ultra is that you are no longer going to have any sort of animation. You're not going to be able to embed videos. So keep everything simple. If it is something, a link that you want your students to go out to, have that link handy, add it into the text chat area, and your students can kind of explore that on their own. Use the application share if you want to share something that has a little bit more interaction, and that was what I used to show you the grade center earlier. Anything that you do is all about the preparation, so if you try any of these things, make sure you follow some of these tips, such as always test your audio and your video if you're using them. I do these quite frequently, usually twice a month, if not more, if I'm doing online consultations. And I still test my audio every time to make sure it's working properly. And get in there early so that you can make sure you address any of those bugs. See you later. See you in the next one. Give your students a chance to test their equipment. Let them into the environment early so they can try things out. Set up a rehearsal time if your students are going to be using Ultra for presentations so that they're comfortable with the technology. Just to think about what's going on around you when you're doing these. And make sure that there's you don't have a pile of laundry behind you when you're doing these presentations. I closed my blinds today so that there wasn't any harsh light coming in, because that gives you that sort of silhouette effect. Is Collaborate as robust as Adobe Connect? They can and they can't be. Sometimes it's just the level of comfort that you have. Denise, I know you're part of the marketing program, and Adobe Connect can be considered maybe more business friendly. So it has a kind of more modular setup where Collaborate is more academic. It's built into Blackboard. That might be sort of easier for students to find and use. So it's really trust your instructional designer to give you the best recommendation on what would fit your style of course. The chimes are chiming, so I want to get through these last ones. Dark muted colors show up better on screen. Send a reminder email to your students right before so they remember that it's time to get on and have a chat. And again, you can kind of see these bullet points here. Do things you would normally do in your face-to-face course, greet your students, try to engage in some chit-chat at the beginning, get ready to present on time, smile as you present. Even if you don't have your camera on, your voice sounds different when you smile, you sound more engaging. And so smile, and then if you have a lot of students, maybe you have the opportunity to have a TA monitor the chat. I'm a little bit more used to watching what's happening on my chat, but it can take some practice. So again, if you have a TA monitor chat, that's great, or maybe you can assign a student each time to monitor the chat and remind you to check that periodically. So we really are at the end of our session today. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. And if anybody wants to have any more discussions on the topics that we covered, I know we had a lot of questions about having more detail. Go ahead and just shoot me an email. We can have a more detailed conversation about that. But I just want to remind everybody with my contact information. So